I don't think there was a less controversial opinion in my teen years than that Batman and Robin was one of the worst movies ever made. That was essentially taken as fact. The film was a symbol for everything wrong with Hollywood, an overproduced and underwritten spectacle which reduced The Dark Knight to his most shallow and kiddie elements. A film more concerned with cramming as many toys into frame as possible rather than telling a story. Releasing in 1997 at the dawn of the internet age, when nerd culture was beginning to mobilize around fan sites and message boards, only intensified the vitriol against the film. By the 2000s, when performative nerd outrage was an in vogue style in internet review culture, Batman and Robin was a popular punching bag.
A bat! Credit card!
I can't say I was above such behavior. In fact, if anything, I was a bigger hater than most. The general consensus was that, while Batman and Robin sucked, Joel Schumacher's preceding Batman film Batman Forever was at least pretty decent.
If there's anybody watching this that, let's say, loved Batman Forever, and went into Batman and Robin with great anticipation, if I disappointed them in any way, then I really want to apologize, because it wasn't my intention.
And that never made much sense to me, because to my eyes, Batman Forever was every bit the trash fire Batman and Robin was. I mean, they're basically the same movie. They both open with a suit-up montage which culminates with the full reveal of the new Batman actor and the new Batmobile. Both scenes also end with a joke involving food.
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
Don't wait up, Al.
I'll cancel the pizzas.
We then get Batman riding out into the night as Commissioner Gordon briefs him about a supervillain in the midst of a crime, leading to a spectacular action scene where the villain narrowly escapes. The other major supervillain begins as a mild-mannered nerd who turns evil after a trauma, killing a colleague and donning a green costume. This character pitches a mad scientist plan to Bruce Wayne, which is rejected, with Bruce and Batman becoming a target of the character's wrath. Along the way, a new character with a penchant for motorcycles arrives at Wayne Manor and is initially hostile, but eventually discovers the Batcave and vows to become an ally to Batman. We climax on a massive action scene where the heroes overcome the villains, cut to a brief glimpse of Arkham Asylum, and a final image of the heroes running in silhouette together as the bat signal shines bright in the background. And this is to say nothing of the many aesthetic similarities the films share. Indeed, all of the things I hated about Schumacher's second Bat flick, the broad performances, the campy tone, the excessive neon visuals, were all present in his first. Batman Forever may not have sucked as loudly as Batman and Robin, but it sucked in all the same ways. Or at least, that's what I thought at the time. But the tide seems to be shifting for Schumacher's Batman movies. More and more voices have emerged suggesting that maybe these movies aren't so bad after all. Maybe they're actually pretty good. Hell, maybe they're even great. Maybe they even make a valuable contribution to Batman and to cinema. You need only take a look on Letterboxd to see what I'm talking about. Average user rating is still pretty low, especially for Batman and Robin. But saunter over to the popular reviews and you'll find tons of raves. How did we go from one of the most hated films of the last 30 years to being so beloved to inspire an academic book arguing its virtues? Well, to state an obvious answer, nostalgia. The Schumacher Batman movies are about 30 years old at this point after all, meaning a whole generation of adults were once children who grew up with these movies. This is something I can personally attest to. Before I was a snot-nosed teenager who thought these were the worst movies ever, I was a tiny child who thought they were the best movies ever.
I distinctly remember one Christmas morning opening the Batman Legacy VHS collection
And spending the rest of the day excitedly watching the tapes in reverse chronological order. Meaning, I started with the Schumacher movies, because as a kid, those were the ones I was most excited to rewatch. That sort of lingering affection is potent and cherished with age. But I don't think it's just recollection of fond memories from youth informing the reclamation efforts. Time has been oddly kind to Schumacher's Batman, especially compared to modern superhero movie standards. Think the modern superhero movie is overwhelmingly gray and visually dull? Here are vibrant splashes of color. Want a little more sexuality in superhero romances? These films are so horny, they can hardly contain themselves. Hell, do you just wish more superhero movie scenes took place in actual spaces rather than vaguely defined green screen environments? Not only do Schumacher's Batman movies have sets, their sets are so big they had to be filmed in the hangar that once housed Howard Hughes' megaplane, the Spruce Goose. It's not mere nostalgia. Schumacher's Batman offers an experience other superhero movies just don't. And it's an experience other Batman movies don't offer either. You might think that's a good thing given the reputation Schumacher's films have for temporarily killing the franchise, but we're a long way from 1997. It was one thing to complain about Schumacher's camp in the 90s and 2000s, but at this point, we have so many movies about a dark and brooding Batman that it's become the dominant mode of the character. The Dark Knight is the default. In this context, a lighter take on the Caped Crusader, what Tomasz Zagluski termed the Neon Knight, is a more welcome alternative. And it must be stressed that a lot of the objection to Batman Forever, and especially Batman and Robin, wasn't strictly that they were light, or that they were kiddie, or even that they were camp. It's that they were gay. Schumacher took Tim Burton's gothic nightmare city and soaked it in neon colors, glitter, and gaudy costumes, the stylings of classic noir giving way to drag show glamour. Batman himself was placed in tight rubber suits which accentuated male sexual form and given a male partner who lived with Bruce by day and dressed in tight rubber of his own to go adventuring with Batman by night. And these queer elements did not go unnoticed. From Roger Ebert describing the knowing chuckle of an audience during a close-up of Batman's ass, to the homophobic caricature referencing Joel Schumacher in an episode of Batman the Animated Series, queerness was explicit in the discourse on these movies, and often used as a pejorative.
Took your characters and turned them into one 90-minute long gay joke. It's like watching Batman and Robin again.
Those costumes come complete, with bat nipples and bat asses. Alright, y'all know what's coming.
The ambiguously gay duo.
Man, Batman and Robin was so gay.
Reclamation of Schumacher's Batman is in part a reclamation of its queerness, now reconfigured as a point of pride. That the films are indeed gay, and that's part of what makes them great. At the very least, we can acknowledge now that much of the mockery these films received was homophobic in nature, something all the more shameful given Joel Schumacher was himself an openly gay man and has aged much more poorly than the films themselves. More generally, the angry man yelling about how thing terrible style of online film criticism has only seemed increasingly embarrassing in hindsight. These were grown adults hyperbolically raving about how bad entertainment, often made for children, was a grand travesty on par with, war crimes. It makes sense that the film and filmmaker which most bore the brunt of this era, the film that Harry Knowles once compared to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, would be rehabilitated. But are Batman Forever and Batman and Robin actually, good? I'll certainly grant that the hatred for these films was wildly hyperbolic, and that aspects of said hatred were also undeniably homophobic, but that doesn't mean the films are exempt from criticism. I'll also grant that the films stand out when compared to the directions the modern superhero movie has gone, and that is noteworthy, but it's also not the same as being good. Ultimately, the only way to answer this question is to dive in for myself. I may have firmly been on Team Hater once upon a time, but it's been years since I've actually watched Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. With fresh eyes, who knows what I might find? I can't promise I won't still hate these films.
A man's gotta go his own way.
But I do swear to go in with as open a mind as possible. So grab your Batman Forever McDonald's glasses, toast up some Batman and Robin Pop-Tarts, and crank the seal and Smashing Pumpkins, because it's time to revisit Joel Schumacher's Batman.
Tonight's forecast. A freeze is coming.
So how did we get Joel Schumacher's Batman in the first place? Well, after 1989's Batman proved a gargantuan hit, Warner Brothers granted Tim Burton more creative control to stay on for the sequel. And the results were, from a corporate perspective, disappointing. Batman Returns was also technically a hit, but it was a clear step down from the first Batman's riches. While the film's violence and aggressive sexuality proved controversial with fast food chain partners and parents who found the film too dark for children. Can't imagine why. Warner with us less keen on bringing back Burton for Batman 3. I think if Burton had really wanted to, he probably could have stayed on board as director, but evidently Tim did have other films he wanted to make and moved to a producer role on Batman Forever. By June of 1993, Warner had tapped Joel Schumacher to direct, which was a sensible choice. Films like The Lost Boys and Flatliners showed the man could handle moody yet fantastical escapism, but Schumacher's other films were also varied enough to indicate he was a competent journeyman that could follow the mandates of a studio. And indeed, the studio had a clear mandate for Batman Forever: make it lighter and more family-friendly. That's a task Schumacher sought to honor, and when the film went on to break opening weekend records, the mandate for Batman and Robin was to go even lighter and even more family-friendly still. For a lot of Batman fans, that was, in and of itself, sacrilege, and I get that impulse. I tend to prefer my Batman on the darker side too, but there's nothing inherently wrong with a lighthearted Batman. We are talking about a comic book superhero initially created for children, and indeed, the roots of a kid-friendly, lighthearted Batman appear very early in the comics. There's also all sorts of really good lighthearted Batmen. The Adam West Show is great, as is the film's spin-off from 1966, and for all Batman the Animated Series' reputation as a mature and adult series, there are plenty of silly episodes too. Lighthearted Batman can work. Silly Batman can work. The question is, does Schumacher's Batman pull it off? And the answer is complicated. For all their reputation as live-action cartoons for children, the Schumacher Batman movies contain a lot more darkness than you might remember. Forever especially spends a lot of time on Bruce Wayne's psychology, particularly the continued trauma from the death of his parents and his inability to find peace. This isn't just lip service to the character's origin story either, it's a driving concern of the narrative, at the root of Bruce's romance with Chase and his mentorship of the orphan Dick Grayson. The former plays out with Bruce revealing his trauma to Chase in an attempt to come to terms with it, the latter with Bruce relating to Dick through their shared pain.
You can't understand. Your family wasn't killed by a maniac.
Yes, they were. We're the same.
For all the aesthetic differences, this story is a direct continuation of the Burton films. In the first film, Batman finds the killer of his parents and takes revenge. In Batman Returns, we pick up with a Batman for whom vengeance has brought no closure, and has in fact only pushed Bruce further into seclusion, living only as Batman. Batman and Bruce's one attempt to reach out and form a bond with a kindred spirit is dashed, because their shared traumas, the thing that helps make them kindred spirits, also splinter into fundamental differences, which prevent any chance of healing or normalcy together. In Batman Forever, Bruce actively faces this history, that his habit of projecting his trauma onto his enemies before he defeats them has not actually healed his pain.
Then it will happen this way. You make the kill, but your pain doesn't die with Harvey, it grows. So you run out into the night to find another face. And another, and another, until one terrible morning you wake up and realize that revenge has become your whole life. And you won't know why.
The struggle to reconcile the divergent aspects of himself is externalized in the climax, as the Riddler's final game is structured around forcing a collision between the worlds of Bruce Wayne and Batman, symbolized by saving Chase or saving Robin, in the hopes that all will be destroyed in the process, and where the solution is for Bruce and Batman to merge together, not out of pain, but out of choice. There's a lot to like about this story. It's a rich arc for Batman and Bruce Wayne, which builds on prior foundations while simultaneously blazing a new path for the character. It also allows the character a measure of peace and healing while still maintaining the excitement of Batman and leaves space for future adventures. In theory, this is a great Batman story. But in practice, said story clashes wildly with the film's silly side. You have these scenes where Bruce is processing his pain and grappling with his identity, only for the film to throw to Jim Carrey doing extended improv sessions, or actors giving these wacky line deliveries.
Oh no! It's boiling acid!
Oh, there's Bruce Wayne! Brucey!
Or the film pumping in deliberately cartoony sound effects. The actual plot of the film is patently ridiculous, and I don't just mean Riddler's scheme to place his box device in the homes of Gotham, which secretly suck the brainwaves of anyone who uses them. I mean that the film presents this as a mystery for Bruce to solve. This guy is capable of probing his own psychosis, but can't figure out that the weirdo who was clearly obsessed with him, who had an intensely dangerous and unethical science experiment he pitched to Bruce, whose boss died in mysterious circumstances, who suddenly and inexplicably received the capital to build a corporation to rival Wayne Tech and build a machine that's affecting the minds of everyone in the city, including Bruce's own, he can't figure out this guy might in fact be connected to this Riddler fellow committing robberies with Two-Face and sending Bruce threatening messages.
You really are quite bright, despite what people say.
No, he isn't, Alfred. Don't lie like that. And like I said, silly Batman is okay. I would not take umbrage with this storyline and these cartoony elements if they were part of a lighthearted romp that wasn't meant to be taken seriously. But Schumacher does want you to take the film seriously, or at least certain parts of it, and the resulting mix is completely unstable. The goofball antics make it nearly impossible to engage with Bruce's story sincerely, while the somber flashbacks to the death and funeral of the Waynes keep intruding on the cartoony thrill ride the rest of the film is trying to offer. The balance certainly leans more to the silly side, but this wasn't always the case. Schumacher actually shot more scenes concerned with Bruce's psychology, including further revelations about the red diary his father kept and its final entry, and a culminating scene where Bruce revisits the part of the cave he once fell through as a child and encounters a giant bat. You can find a lot of these deleted scenes on the Blu-ray, and there also exists a much fabled Schumacher cut of Batman Forever, which reportedly reinserts a lot of this psychological material and runs close to 3 hours. A rough draft of this cut has in fact been seen by a select few, but it's unclear if it'll ever get a proper release. I'd certainly be curious to see it if it does. The scene where Bruce confronts the bat in the cave is beautifully shot and very evocative, even in its incomplete state, and I also think some of the cut scenes would help flesh out the story. Particularly notable is an extended conversation between Bruce and Alfred, where the two discuss if Batman is actually a curse and an enemy of Bruce Wayne.
Maybe I didn't become Batman to fight crime. Maybe it was to fight that fear.
And instead, you became the fear.
If that's true, then Batman is my enemy.
This is in fact an extremely important setup for the climax and Riddler forcing a choice between Batman and Bruce Wayne. The theme of duality is certainly present in Batman Forever, but the idea that the two sides of Bruce's personality are in conflict is only really brought up in this cut scene, and its absence makes Riddler asking if the two can coexist feel a bit random and unmotivated. So I can see the Schumacher cut improving the film to some degree, but the core tonal clash would still very much be present. The balance between the dark and the light might be more even, but the issue with Batman Forever is less that the ingredients are out of proportion than that the ingredients are fundamentally mismatched. In theory, Batman and Robin fixes this mismatch. The film pushes much further into cartoony extremes than even Forever did, and Bruce is no longer dwelling on his childhood trauma. Even aesthetically, the film pulls more liberally from the Adam West TV series in its cutting and cinematography. This should be the pure, lighthearted, silly Batman adventure. Except the major thread running through the film is that Alfred's sickness is slowly killing him.
Alfred's sick.
Alfred's not sick. He's dying.
That he's dying from the fictional McGregor syndrome rather than an actual disease does make it at least a little less real, but it's still a very heavy subplot to put in the center of any Batman movie, much less one which also includes a gorilla striptease. Alfred's illness also leads to a lot of dialogue scenes with Bruce, where the two discuss life and legacy, including lines like, What is Batman, if not an effort to master the chaos that sweeps our world? An attempt to control death itself.
But I can't, can I?
None of us can.
Why have scenes like this when the rest of the movie presents Batman as uncomplicated childhood fantasy? And on a related note, let's talk about Mr. Freeze. Freeze is one of the most maligned aspects of Batman and Robin. From the endless ice puns to Schwarzenegger's bulldozing performance to the character being reduced to a simplistic doomsday plot. It was just 5 years prior that Batman the Animated Series had completely reinvented Mr. Freeze, transforming him from a one-dimensional baddie with a freezing gimmick to a man tortured by the tragic loss of his wife and a condition which left him physically isolated from the rest of the world. For that character to be reduced back down to a one-dimensional Saturday morning cartoon seemed actively insulting. At the peak of my hatred for these movies, Freeze was maybe the single element I hated the most. But maybe that was misguided. Surely, the casting of Schwarzenegger is indicative of the filmmaker's intentions, right? The goal was not pathos, it was an over-the-top baddie for Batman to overcome, and Arnold's goofy charisma is oddly perfect for the task. Physically imposing, yes, but also deeply silly. The man really sinks his teeth into those ice puns, and is clearly having a blast playing such a diabolical villain. He isn't failing at playing Mr. Freeze as a tragic figure, he's succeeding at playing him as a Saturday morning cartoon. Maybe that's not my favorite interpretation of the character, but it is the one that Batman and Robin is going for. Then again, if that is what the film is going for, why still give him the tragic origin story from Batman the Animated Series? If the goal was one-dimensional villainy, why have Freeze mourning a wife stricken by disease and encased in an eternal slumber? It's like the film is trying to thread the needle between the goofball Freeze of the Adam West show and the anguish of the character's 90s reinvention. A more nuanced actor than Arnold might have been able to pull that off, but at a fundamental level, this mix just doesn't work. The brain whiplashes between images of melancholy and pain, images lifted directly from the animated series, to Freeze conducting his hockey player henchman in a performance of the Snow Miser song.
Louder, come on, sing!
The film successfully creates an entertainingly one-dimensional villain, only to undercut it with failed gestures towards depth. Just let Arnold be silly. It's why across both Schumacher films, the best performance is Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy. Thurman's work is so specific, with line deliveries that evoke both classic Mae West films and drag performers, that Ivy becomes a camp spectacle. Every look, every gesture, and every word is deliberate, ironic performance. This is most widely discussed in terms of gender. Thurman's portrayal of a hyper-feminine seductress is such a knowing performance that Ivy becomes a parody of femininity, itself suggesting that all gender is performance. Schumacher's direction reinforces this commentary. Ivy is explicitly sexual, but she's not sexualized by the camera, or at least not for the pleasure of the presumed hetero-male spectator. The spectacle of Ivy is less the character's eroticism and more how Thurman performs that eroticism, and how the audience is made aware of that performance. But this camp effect also extends more broadly. Ivy's eco-terrorist motivations are technically intact, but their expression is so heightened and over the top that they too are rendered as pure performance, in this case as signifiers of villainy rather than any coherent ideology about environmentalism. Because the film very clearly doesn't actually care about environmentalism in any meaningful sense, it's just motivation to justify Ivy's character, and that frees Thurman to just be fun. On that note, I want to shout out the second best performance in Batman and Robin, John Glover as Dr. Jason Woodrue. Glover, who also, fun fact, played the Riddler in Batman the Animated Series, is also giving an over-the-top camp performance, employing all of the signifiers of the mad scientist, that the result is a parody of the archetype, and it's a joy to behold.
Well, I can respect your opinion. Sadly, I'm not good at rejection. I'm afraid you'll have to die.
There's a gleeful abandoning of the traditional standards of good acting that's especially fun to watch with actors this entertaining when they go over the top. It's in moments like this I see the appeal of a camp spectacle and live-action cartoon. But the films never fully commit to this vision. Schumacher keeps reining things in with efforts at the more straightforward thrills of an action blockbuster, both diluting the camp elements and placing them in a context where they just read as bad rather than knowing and fun. The split between camp entertainment and conventional blockbuster is best embodied in the images of Batman and his allies running toward the camera that end both Schumacher films. The imagery is evocative of the cartoon intro to The Adam West Show, ostensibly aligning the films with that camp comedy. But it's also cooler and sexier. The characters are in silhouette, outlined by the blazing light of the bat signal as they run in slow motion. The music isn't a jokey theme song repeating the character's name, it's Elliot Goldenthal's epic orchestral score. There's also a moment in Batman Forever that pokes fun at Burt Ward's Robin, frequently exclaiming, "Holy blank, Batman!"
Holy jack-in-the-box! Holy red herring! Holy stuffy! Holy ravioli!
Holy rusted metal, Batman! Huh? The ground, it's all metal, it's full of holes, you know? Holy!
Oh. It's a cute joke, but it's also telling, especially in conjunction with the end shot, a way of saying that these films are like that silly old Batman show, but a souped-up and modern version of it. Slick action blockbusters offering superior spectacle and excitement. And with that in mind, it's worth asking, how are Schumacher's Batman films as action movies? Let's start by returning to Forever's action climax. I've already mentioned that the scene lacks adequate setup with Bruce and Alfred's earlier dialogue scene being cut, but a greater issue is how the set piece flounders as an action scene. Riddler poses Batman with a challenge. Chase and Robin are each suspended above separate deadly drops. How can Batman possibly save both? And the answer is, he just sort of does. Blowing up Riddler's machine reveals the floor is part illusion, and everyone is in fact falling down the same hole. So Batman can dive down and grab Chase and then Robin before either hit the bottom. It's not an awful scene exactly, there's clear production value in the explosions and special effects, and the editing conveys danger and suspense reasonably well. But the solution to the problem feels like a cheat. Riddler presents a challenge, Batman circumvents it through gadgetry, then wins with relative ease. There's no cleverness to how Batman solves the problem, it's unclear how he even knows what to do here, and the visceral action lacks excitement. The first Spider-Man movie also has a scene where the villain attempts to force the hero to choose between saving one of two parties in a death drop freefall, but there, you see how arduous saving both actually is. There's tension and drama in the sheer physicality of the act that is entirely lacking in Batman Forever. Once Riddler's floor trick is revealed, there's no real obstacle for Batman to overcome, and the ensuing theatrics are more a mechanical necessity, an obligation to fulfill the structure of a superhero movie. The scene is also indicative of a recurring problem in the Schumacher Batman movies, where the dangers Batman faces are easily solved by a gadget which has not been introduced before and will never be used again. It's easy to criticize Batman and Robin introducing new vehicles and costumes for the climax in a transparent effort to introduce more toys, but that wouldn't be such a problem if those toys were justified within the text. This tech could have been part of the story, created specifically to counteract Mr. Freeze and his arsenal. That is technically the role they serve in the film, I guess, but they aren't established beforehand, nor do they address anything specific. Batman just has anti-freeze tech now. The end result of gadgetry being consistently relied on to solve all problems is it subconsciously trains us not to invest in the action scenes. It's the cinematic equivalent of a child playing a game and yelling "shield" whenever it looks like he'll lose. There's never any tension because we know Batman will have a get-out-of-jail-free card, and there's no engagement as a viewer because said card will just be pulled from out of nowhere. This problem is only exacerbated by the absurdity of Batman and Robin's action. While Batman Forever at least keeps one foot in a relatable physical world, Batman and Robin descend so far into cartoonish spectacle that it becomes white noise. The opening set piece alone transitions from a fight scene in a museum to a rocket ship firing into space to Batman and Robin surfing through the air as they chase Mr. Freeze. And keep in mind, this is how the film starts. How is an action scene supposed to convey any tension when the characters can do this? And it's unfortunate that the action is so ineffective, because on a rewatch, the craft of these films holds up a lot better than I remembered. Particularly impressive is Barbara Ling's production design, which expands the scope and feel of Gotham City. The use of large models and miniatures allows the camera to move vertically through the space and really lends a sense of scale to the city. There's also some early CGI cityscapes which admittedly have aged quite a bit, but they also allow Gotham to feel even more vast. On a design level, the neon signs and lights I once so despised are in fact a treat, a great way to add pops of light and color to the city while still allowing Gotham to exist as a city of the night. Then there's the giant statues of human bodies. We technically get glimpses of similar statues in Batman Returns, but Schumacher really runs with the idea. These massive sculptures of perfect bodies towering over the streets, elevating Gotham's fantastical and otherworldly qualities. Combined with the anatomic shape and muscles of the bat suits, the films create a world of Greek statuesque perfection, imbuing a mythic quality to the narrative. This is also reflected in some of the locations. The fact that Arkham Asylum looks less like a hospital than it does a dark castle for the forces of evil to gather. There are little details I like too, like how a lot of interior locations still have windows which remind us of the world beyond, or how Forever still uses a few real locations in addition to constructed sets, tethering the film's fantastical world to a relatable reality. There are also things I could nitpick. It bothers me that Two-Face's helicopter crashes into the Statue of Liberty rather than a statue unique to Gotham, and the illusion of a fantastical wonder city is hampered when you see fast food chains in the background. Still, at least they are relegated to the background. Product placement would certainly get a lot worse in superhero movies. Standards do also start to slip in Batman and Robin. The sets are still technically impressive and boast clear production value, but they feel more like amusement park attractions than actual places. There's less effort to disguise that we're on backlots and sound stages, and it does distract from the fantasy. Overall though, the production design is a clear highlight of both these films. On that note, let's talk about Schumacher's visual style more broadly.
Hot entrance.
Batman Forever was actually nominated for a Best Cinematography Oscar, and while I always found that an absurd nomination, rewatching the film it started to make a bit more sense. Lighting in particular is very atmospheric, and does a great job walking the line between moody gothic and lighthearted escapism. Bruce's flashbacks are actually a really good example of this, technically shrouded in darkness, but a dark blue rather than pure black, allowing for some color while still conveying a gloomy mood. The film also uses shafts of light to suggest a heightened reality, and generally injects a greater cinematic texture to the picture. I'm not sure I would have nominated the film over movies like Seven, Heat, 12 Monkeys, Casino, Strange Days, Nixon, Crimson Tide, Dead Man, Dead Presidents, The Quick and the Dead. Alright, the nomination is still kinda ridiculous, but I at least get the logic. Batman Forever does emphasize sensational imagery, and the results range from the sleek and the sexy to the exciting and the mysterious to even being a little spooky. It's a good-looking movie, and that makes Batman and Robin all the more disappointing. The money is still clearly on screen, but Schumacher and returning cinematographer Steven Goldblatt are far less precise in their lighting and framing. Too many scenes are shot wide and flat at eye level, on sets blasted with light, which has the added effect of revealing the inherent limitations of the costumes. When Batman and Robin aren't shrouded in darkness or framed deliberately, they look ridiculous. The ethos is still sensational imagery for its own sake, but the presentation is so plain that the images underwhelm, and paradoxically, this clearly very expensive movie ends up looking cheap. Key example of what I'm talking about. Batman gets knocked on his back, Poison Ivy attempts to seduce him, Batman has to break free and apprehend Ivy. Let's see how it looks.
No. First you're gonna tell me where Freeze is, and then you're going to jail.
It's just so awkward. Clooney struggles to get to a vertical base. We even hear him grunting as he heaves himself up, while Thurman just has to wait for Clooney to get into position so the scene can continue. And look, I get that the suit is heavy and cumbersome, and Clooney is beginning the scene from an unideal position. But why shoot the scene like this in the first place? And when the best take is still this awkward, why not reposition and try something else? It's indicative of the haphazard way the entirety of Batman and Robin was shot, and for a film that is defined by the sheer power of the imagery, that's basically a fatal blow. Because these are not movies you want to let stand on the strength of their screenplays. The main plots are basic doomsday schemes, but the devil is in the details. Batman and Robin is just overstuffed with baggage, with Batgirl and Bruce Wayne's girlfriend Julie Madison proving especially unnecessary. Julie has 2.5 scenes. In the first, she's introduced as Bruce's girlfriend, and we see Bruce is uncomfortable with the idea of marriage. In the second scene, she presses Bruce about marriage, and Bruce reiterates his discomfort while hallucinating about poison ivy. We see Julie one final time briefly when the giant telescope is revealed. That's it. There's no payoff to this relationship, it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't contribute anything except that it shows Ivy is in Bruce's head, which we get elsewhere. Julie is an entirely superfluous addition to a movie already stuffed to the gills with characters. Batgirl is ostensibly more important in so much as she actually, does something, but her presence is not well integrated. Between her introduction and her reveal as Batgirl, the only characters she interacts with are Robin and Alfred. She has no scenes one-on-one with Bruce or Batman, and only interacts with Ivy at the end when they fight. And that, in and of itself, is weird. The conflict Ivy stirs between the dynamic duo is one of Batman and Robin's most emphasized narrative threads. But instead of paying it off with the two uniting and defeating Ivy, someone else who Ivy doesn't even know just does it instead. I get that it would be difficult to stage an action scene where our heroes unite to triumphantly beat up a woman, but there are ways around that. The animated series certainly found ways to create action scenes between these characters. Schumacher claims he wanted to have Batgirl so little girls would have someone to identify with too, and given how involved toy companies were in the film's production, I'm sure more merchandising opportunities was also a factor. I get the logic, but the writing has not made adequate steps to integrate Batgirl's character into the story. Forever does not suffer from superfluous characters, and unlike Batman and Robin, the film actually offers a character arc for Batman himself. On the other hand, Batman and Robin actually improves on Forever's screenplay in a couple of ways. At least Batman and Robin's supervillain team-up is a bit more motivated. Poison Ivy is invited to the charity auction by Bruce Wayne and attends to scope out potential enemies in Batman and Robin, while Mr. Freeze is lured to the event to steal more diamonds. The two meet organically, and Ivy is attracted to Freeze as a partner and a means to achieve her own goals of world domination. In Batman Forever, Two-Face and the Riddler are on completely separate tracks for the first act of the movie, until Riddler sees Two-Face wreaking havoc on TV, likes what he sees, and decides he'd like to team up. It's not until about an hour in that the characters actually meet. Riddler's opening scene also sets up his principal motivation, that he is obsessed with Bruce Wayne and is devastated when that love is not reciprocated, vowing revenge.
You were supposed to understand. I'll make you understand.
But after he becomes a supervillain, Riddler doesn't actually do anything to Bruce except send some threatening riddles that tease at his true identity, then act like a dick to him at a party. The film establishes motivation, then does next to nothing with it until Riddler discovers Bruce is Batman. Of course, the screenplay is a secondary concern in films like these. What matters is that Two-Face and the Riddler are put together so their personalities can clash. And clash they do, in endless scenes of mugging to the camera and hysterical screeching.
Why can't you just die?
Yeah, in case it isn't obvious, I'm not a fan of these performances. It's evident that Tommy Lee Jones and Jim Carrey were cast for their fame rather than for fitting the parts. Jones had just won an Oscar for The Fugitive, while Carrey had just released Ace Ventura. By the time Batman Forever hit theaters, Carrey had emerged as a comedy superstar, and indeed, he spends most of the film doing his shtick of flailing limbs, facial contortions, and goofy voices. It's manic, annoying, and fails to portray any character. There's certainly precedent for a manic Riddler in the comics and in the Adam West show, but there's still an underlying intelligence. Frank Gorshin was animated and over the top, yes, but he also conveyed a ruthless brilliance and a smug air of superiority, a clear belief that he was smarter than everyone else in the room. I don't get any of that from Carrie. In fact, I don't get any character at all. I just see a comedian improving bits. It's quite tedious, and I'm not alone in thinking that. Jones himself expressed a distaste for Carrie on the set, famously telling Jim, and I quote, "I cannot sanction your buffoonery." That's a great line, but frankly, I can't sanction Jones's buffoonery either. His Two-Face is little more than a third-rate Joker ripoff, a giggling maniac causing chaos for chaos's sake and obsessed with killing the Bat. Schumacher talks a lot about the character's schizophrenia and duality, but that's all only external. Jones's performance only has one mode. So far, this revisit has not proved especially revelatory. I still see Batman Forever and Batman and Robin as highly flawed movies, to say the least. But of course, I have yet to discuss the most interesting and controversial aspect of Joel Schumacher's Batman, his queerness. After all, it was a rejection of a perceived gay Batman that fueled so much of the hatred for these films, and that now fuels their modern reclamation. These are superhero films which flaunt queer aesthetics, celebrate male bodies, and are centered on the relationship of two men who find purpose in their partnership. These are films where the evil seductress draws less on classic noir femme fatales than she does drag performers, where henchmen wear S&M fetish masks, leather, and dog collars. And of course, where the director is himself an out gay man. And while Schumacher resisted being pigeonholed as a gay director, he didn't hide his own sexuality either. Then there's the nipples on the Batsuit. Now you might have noticed I've gone this far into the video without mentioning bat nipples once, and that's by design. The way this costuming detail has gone down in infamy as convenient shorthand for explaining why the Schumacher movies suck is frankly absurd. It's not uncommon for widely hated movies to be boiled down to a single surface element that is easily recognized as bad while ignoring the deeper and more fundamental flaws integral to the work, but rarely has a detail been this innocuous. It's just some nips. Who cares? Are they really any sillier than the fake pecs and abs on the Tim Burton or Chris Nolan suits? They're about as functional. Personally, I'd be happy to go my entire life without having to litigate batsuit nipples ever again. But the fact that they've proven so infamous means they warrant some discussion. And indeed, the outrage they've generated is directly connected to the film's queerness. Other batsuits may have also presented exaggerated male anatomy, but they did so in ways which conformed to hetero-identification with a macho power fantasy. Pecs and abs denote physical strength that men are conditioned to find aspirational. Nipples aren't symbols of power, though. They provide a sensual quality to Batman, and in effect, sexualize the character, removing him from his dominant position of power and making him an object of desire, be it that of heterosexual women or gay men, and in turn, cutting the cis-straight male spectator out of the identification loop. And if you think I'm reaching with this read, I want you to consider something. You know what looks way sillier than the bat nipples? The bat codpiece. This is so much more absurd than some nips, but I've never heard any complaints about it, because a giant phallus again plays into heteronormative ideas about dominant masculine power. The vitriol is always reserved for nipples or asses, the things that render Batman and Robin sexually desirable, and by extension, vulnerable. But for all the queer elements, for all the defiance of heteronorms, I have to ask, how gay are these movies really? You know what the first line in Batman and Robin is?
I want a car. Chicks dig the car.
And there's a lot of that throughout these movies. Both full-on horn-dogging from Robin.
Go for a little ride on my love machine, baby.
Doesn't Batman ever kiss the girl?
I could definitely get into the superhero gig. Please be looking for me.
And more broad yet persistent displays of heterosexuality. The plots of both films are driven by hetero attraction, be it the romance with Chase in Batman Forever or the mutual lusting for Poison Ivy in Batman and Robin. I asked earlier why Julie Madison was even in Batman and Robin, and the obvious answer is to provide Bruce plausible deniability. Batman's not gay, he has a girlfriend, see? The deniability is pretty weak, given he and the film seem actively disinterested in Julie, but that's nonetheless why she's there. And it's not just the heroes, the villains also have a hefty dose of no homoing. Two-Face has 2 sexy girlfriends. Mr. Freeze, in addition to being married, has a sexy lady that hangs around his lair who's into him. Hell, even Alfred has a deleted scene where he talks about the woman he once loved. There's also moments like this from Batman Forever.
Women.
You can certainly view that from a queer lens, but to my eyes, it's a much more straight-coded moment, this humor at how frustrating women are to deal with. But the central factor which makes me question these films' supposed queerness is the relationship between Batman and Robin itself. Simply put, I don't buy these guys as lovers. Don't get me wrong, the pair carry several signifiers of queerness. These are 2 grown men living together, something Bruce essentially seduces Dick into, and as Nick Winstead points out in his essay on queerness in Schumacher's Batman, the pair become domestic partners living together before they are united in crime fighting. And indeed, the 2 talk frequently about being partners.
Not just a friend.
A partner.
There's also an undeniably fetishistic component to their costumes and the sensual accentuation of desirable men's bodies. Even isolated, seemingly innocuous lines carry a potential homoerotic double meaning.
Who's your tailor?
Hang out at a lot of biker bars, Bruce.
But the thing is, this is all subtext. In terms of narrative, not only do these 2 not seem attracted to each other, they don't even seem to like each other. In Batman Forever, they don't even have many scenes together. Once Dick arrives at Wayne Manor, he just sort of hangs around with Alfred while Bruce is off dealing with the plot. There's a pretty good deleted scene where Bruce tries to reach out to Dick, showing interest in his life and future, but that's missing in the theatrical cut, where the 2 don't have a single interaction after their first meeting until Dick discovers the Batcave and steals the Batmobile. Bruce only cares about Dick when the plot demands it, which makes it really weird when Bruce says,
Listen to me, Dick, I'm your friend.
You are? Because you in the film seem way more interested in pursuing Chase, who gets more scenes with Batman/Bruce Wayne, and she's also more integral to the story. The men have a lot more scenes together in Batman and Robin, but unfortunately, Forever's indifference has evolved into outright hostility. The 2 spend the whole movie endlessly bickering.
This is no partnership. You're never gonna trust me. I made a mistake, I'm sorry. Don't go all protective on me. It's not gonna happen again.
You were reckless, and you almost got killed by Freeze tonight.
I'm fine.
Dick, don't push me right now.
I want a Robin signal in the sky, all right? I'm tired of living in your shadow. Couldn't stand it. Something was gonna be mine and not yours, could you?
She wants to kill you, Dick. Pull back. You can't make the jump.
I can make it!
Pull back!
I can make it!
Part of this is Poison Ivy's influence, and there is a potential queer undertone in 2 men being pulled apart by the possibility of a hetero romance before realizing they really love each other. But even before Ivy is introduced, Bruce and Dick are at each other's throats.
You break it, you buy it.
How about nice to see you? Glad you're here to save my life? How are we supposed to work together if you won't trust me?
It's exhausting, and it also sours the central relationship between our heroes. Batman and Robin is ostensibly aligned with the buddy movie, a subgenre of films concentrated on the relationships between men engaged in traditionally masculine activities while sidelining women. Yes, Batgirl does join the adventure eventually, but only very late in the film, and is a clear distant third to the dynamic duo. And a defining feature of the buddy movie is the unspoken homoerotic subtext inherent in stories of men way more interested in spending time with each other than with women. The difference is the buddy movies awash in the richest homoeroticism had real affection. Whether Butch and Sundance or Rizzo and Joe Buck were actually gay is a matter of subtext, but that they loved each other was unambiguous. There was warmth and physical intimacy in how these men cared for each other, and that never emerges between Batman and Robin. There is a lack of love between our heroes. which is not true of the villains. If Schumacher's Batman has an iconic gay couple, it's not Batman and Robin, it's Two-Face and the Riddler. Not only do the two clearly love each other's company, there's also tremendous physical affection and even intimacy in how they relate to each other. They also have moments of bickering, sure, but far more of joy, which is all the more impressive given Jones's real-life annoyance with Carrie's antics. To again draw on Nick Winstead's essay, the characters also display queer aesthetics in their costumes. Riddler's multiple outfits draw from queer icons like Ziggy Stardust and Liberace, while Two-Face's split suit symbolizes the divide between homosexual repression and liberation. One side is a conservative, monochromatic suit, the kind of professional attire you'd expect from a politician. The other side is this wild blend of colors and animal print, loud, boisterous, and defiant of traditional conservative standards. For all the ways Schumacher's Batman evokes the Adam West era, the queer coding of the villains might actually be the strongest. As film professor Harry M. Benshoff suggests, it was the colorful villains of West's Batman which may have most appealed to queer and countercultural audiences, while squares could root for Batman and Robin, who, for all their own queer coding, ultimately stood for the preservation of the status quo.
Support your police. That's our message.
Well said, Robin.
And while Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy lack that homoeroticism, there is nonetheless something subversive about their partnership. I used to find it exceedingly strange to pair these characters specifically, given their goals are just inherently incompatible. Mr. Freeze wants to freeze the Earth, Poison Ivy wants to reshape the Earth so all plant life flourishes. This is not a sustainable relationship, but that seemingly nonsensical plotting makes for a fascinating critique of heterosexual couples. Freeze and Ivy share nothing in common, yet are drawn together anyway by the conventions of superhero movies, just as so many straight couples are virtually incompatible save for fulfilling the obligations of heteronormativity. Within the relationship, Ivy is a scheming and manipulative woman, nefariously working against Freeze's best interest, while Freeze is a rube, thinking he's this cool, unaffected alpha, when in fact he's being easily played. Is it really just coincidence that Thurman's performance of camp hyperfemininity is contrasted by Arnold, arguably the defining symbol of masculinity in the 80s and 90s? Arnold doesn't play Mr. Freeze with the same camp affect Thurman does Ivy, but he doesn't have to. His sheer presence and baseline exude a hypermasculinity. The pair's final scene literalizes that old joke of hetero marriage being like a prison, trapped together in Arkham Asylum as Freeze vows to make Ivy's life a living hell.
Winter has come at last.
Keep in mind, this is also after Batman has revealed Freeze's wife Nora is still alive, and Freeze can continue his research to try and cure her. Freeze's final scene could very easily have been tending to Nora and the hope of their symbolic heterosexual romance flourishing again. Instead, Schumacher concentrates on his toxic parody of straight couples. A final queer element that must be discussed, though, is Batman Forever's climax. The surface challenge of Riddler's trap is the conflict between Bruce Wayne and Batman, symbolized in forcing to choose between saving Bruce's girlfriend or saving Batman's crime-fighting partner. It doesn't take much imagination, however, to see a sexual subtext, a forced choice between heterosexuality and homosexuality. In saving both and reconciling the seemingly conflicting aspects of himself, Bruce/Batman embraces a more fluid, free-flowing sexuality, liberating himself from a binary. But this fluid sexuality has been evident throughout the film. Robin may be Batman's partner, but so too is Dick Grayson, Bruce Wayne's. Chase may be Bruce's girlfriend, but she loved Batman first, and Batman loved her back. Batman subverts Riddler's trap so easily because Riddler's dichotomy was flawed from the start. It's a powerful statement from Schumacher especially, a man who was openly gay, but also spoke of having women sexual partners, and who resisted having his identity labeled by an all-encompassing descriptor of sexuality. In sum, queerness is certainly present in Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, but it's also compromised. offset by appeals to heterosexuality so as not to make mainstream audiences uncomfortable, and hindered by the lack of affection between the supposedly gay heroes. And I'm not naive. I understand why the former happened. The 90s may have seen some milestones in queer representation in mainstream film, but it was still a deeply homophobic culture. One need only see the vitriol that still faces films which even gesture towards the possibility of a gay character to get a sense of how ingrained resistance to queerness was and remains. It's frankly remarkable Schumacher's Batman was able to emerge as gay as he did, and that has resonated with queer audiences. Just look at The People's Joker, which not only builds a Gotham City with clear cues from Schumacher's Batman, but also cites Batman Forever specifically as a turning point for writer-director Vera Drew's recognition of her own trans identity. There's also something quite cool and subversive about Warner, wanting to quell the conservative concerns that their last Batman movie was too sexual and inappropriate, only to hand the reins to a gay man who injected the franchise with queer subtext aesthetically and narratively. I want to embrace that with open arms, but the bitterness between Batman and Robin keeps me at a distance. It's a contradiction at the heart of Schumacher's Batman movies, that the queer-coded superhero partners don't actually seem to like each other very much. Indeed, contradiction is the name of the game with these films. In the introduction to Neon Night Forever, Tomasz Ceglowski describes Batman Forever and Batman and Robin as, quote, too unorthodox and bizarre to become general crowd pleasers, whilst being too commercially driven and mainstream to be inducted among underground cult classics. In other words, they're films which are both subverting the norms of superhero blockbusters while still trying to sell you some Taco Bell. And the films are defined by such contradictions. Schumacher's Batman movies are live-action cartoons, but also earnest attempts to explore Bruce Wayne's psychological trauma. Schumacher's Batman movies are camp comedies in the vein of the Adam West series, but still spend hundreds of millions of dollars on cutting-edge special effects and high-octane action scenes. Schumacher's Batman movies are celebrations of queerness, but ones without affection between its heroes and full of appeals to heteronormativity. Some of this is the byproduct of the monstrosity that is big studio filmmaking and the forced synergy between artistry and corporate interest. But I also think some of it stems directly from Joel himself. As stylized as his direction can be, Joel Schumacher is functionally a journeyman director, obliging the parameters of a specific project and looking to entertain the audience above all else. With Batman, the mandate was to go lighter and more family-friendly, but Schumacher has also acknowledged that many Bat fans like the dark aspects of the material. Schumacher was himself one of those fans. The Batman story he most wanted to tell was actually Batman Year One, Frank Miller's gritty retelling of Batman's origin story that would eventually be a partial basis for Batman Begins. Hired to make light entertainment, yet understanding the appeal of the dark, Schumacher brings both to the fold. Hired to make a crowd-pleasing spectacle, Schumacher injects everything he can think of to entertain the audience, from camp to comedy to slick action to gorgeous movie stars. Queer sensibilities emerge throughout the work, but tempered so as to oblige mainstream corporate interests. In short, these are movies trying to be all things to all people, collapsing into chaos from their divergent goals. So to circle back to my initial question, no. I don't think Batman Forever or Batman and Robin are actually good. I do, in fact, still think they're pretty bad. But not as bad as I remembered. The thing about these kinds of messy productions is you'll often find glimmers of greatness amidst the chaos, and Schumacher's Batman is awash in such glimmers. The aforementioned production design across both films is staggering, and I'm impressed with Elliot Goldenthal's music, not just for its inherent qualities, but for stepping into a franchise with such a defined musical aesthetic and carving out its own identity. My rewatch also gave me a newfound appreciation for Val Kilmer's performance. His work feels like a natural extension of what Michael Keaton was doing with the character, imbued with a more prominent sensitivity reflecting the character's growth and the film's greater emphasis on romance. Kilmer also subtly distinguishes Bruce Wayne from Batman and generally inhabits the role with grace and dignity. Batman Forever in general gained a lot from this rewatch. In addition to Kilmer's performance and the glossy cinematography, I also enjoyed some of the subtleties I used to take for granted. The recurring image of clasping hands is a nice visual motif to tell Dick Grayson's story, from being part of a family to reaching out for a new one, and finally to acceptance and partnership. There's also this great little moment where Chase kisses Bruce and remembers the kiss from Batman, recognizing they are in fact one and the same. There's no dialogue here, it's just the actors conveying a realization with their faces that's both touching and a little sexy. Batman and Robin doesn't have these kind of subtleties, and is in fact so sloppy that any defenses I might offer for aspects of it will only go so far. That said, it's a far cry from one of the worst movies ever made, or even one of the worst comic book movies ever made. You'll find more creative inspiration in any random scene from Batman and Robin than you will in the entirety of Black Adam. I can also personally attest that not only did I love the film as a kid, but many kids still love it. My local indie theater plays VHS tapes in the lobby, and while I was writing this video, I witnessed a collection of children positively mesmerized by Batman and Robin. And why shouldn't they be? It's fast and colorful and full of superpowered action figures. That doesn't give the movie a free pass, but its enduring success as a children's movie should not be overlooked. And if nothing else, while it may frequently be bad, it's never boring. The extreme cocktail of divergent goals means there's always something perplexing or funny, or even genuinely good to marvel at. All told, I suspect the legacy of Joel Schumacher's Batman movies will become more accurate the further away we get from both their initial releases in the 1990s and the angry reviewer internet culture of the 2000s. Free from the hype of mass marketing and the hyperbole of nerd outrage, the films can be more fairly assessed as the deeply flawed, yet often interesting works that they are, recognized for their failings, but also for their ambitions and creativity. For my part, I still think the films are bad. There's simply too many contradictions, too much sloppy filmmaking, and too many things I just flatly dislike. But I also found a lot more to appreciate in these movies than I ever would have thought possible. Genuinely impressive aesthetic elements, compelling performances, and thematic complexities worth breaking down. I may be unconvinced that Joel Schumacher's Batman is good actually, but it did deserve a revisit, and I'm glad I gave it one.